how did Norse sailors cross a cold, uncertain ocean and reach North America centuries before Columbus, without the maps later explorers would rely on? One possible answer lies in a half-legendary object called the sunstone, a tool that may have helped them find the hidden sun when the North Atlantic sky turned grey. Long before the Atlantic appeared on familiar European maps, Norse sailors were already moving through it. They did not wait for a cartographer to draw the Western Ocean. They learned by sailing it. Their world expanded step by step, from coastal Norway to Iceland, from Iceland to Greenland, and then farther west again. Each voyage depended on memory, seasonal knowledge, landmarks, currents, birds, and the discipline of crews who knew how to read sea and sky. That matters, because the Viking arrival in North America was not a sudden miracle. It was part of a chain. By around 985, Eric the Red had helped establish Norse settlements in Greenland. Those colonies became a western base, a place from which another horizon could be tested. Around the year 1000, voyages linked to Leif Erikson and others reached lands west of Greenland. In later saga tradition, these places became known as Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. So when we ask whether a forgotten navigation stone proves the Vikings reached America before any mapmaker, we should pause. The landing itself does not need proof from a stone. Archaeology has already settled that. The real question is narrower and more intriguing. What helped them find the way across? The story turns west through Greenland. The Norse settlements there were remote, exposed, and difficult. But they were real communities, not just temporary camps. Farms, churches, and trading links tied Greenland into the wider Norse world. It was harsh country, yet it offered something vital. It placed experienced sailors on the edge of the unknown Atlantic. From Greenland, the leap to new lands was still dangerous, but it was no longer unimaginable. A crew leaving those fjords was not launching from Europe proper. They were already deep into the North Atlantic system. They understood drifting ice, sudden fog, long summer light, and the need to use every environmental clue available. Navigation here was not a matter of a single instrument replacing skill. It was a layered craft. This is one reason the sunstone idea attracts so much attention. In such waters, clouds could hide the sun for long stretches. Fog could flatten the horizon. Twilight could linger in deceptive ways at high latitude. A method for estimating the sun's position, even imperfectly, might have been useful. Not magical, not infallible. Just one more aid in a navigator's toolkit, if it truly existed in practical use. Much of what people know about Viking voyages west comes from the Icelandic sagas. These texts describe journeys beyond Greenland to lands of stone, forest, and grapes or berries, remembered as Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. They were written down centuries after the events they describe, and they are not simple logbooks. They blend memory, family prestige, oral tradition, and literary shaping. That means historians handle them carefully. The sagas are not worthless because they were written later, but they cannot be treated as perfectly literal either. Their value lies in the way they preserve a broad memory of Western exploration that, in at least one major respect, turned out to be true. The same caution applies to the famous word solarstein, usually translated as sunstone. Medieval texts do mention such a stone, and one saga episode describes finding the sun's position under overcast skies. But the meaning of that term remains debated. Was it a symbolic object? A known mineral? A literary flourish? A practical navigational aid? The sources do not answer cleanly. So the sunstone enters history not as a proven instrument recovered from a Viking captain's hand, but as a suggestive clue. A small word in a later manuscript tradition, pointing toward a larger mystery. If the sagas leave room for debate, The ground does not. In the 1960s, Helga and Anne Stein Ingstad excavated Ramskou meadows in Newfoundland and uncovered the evidence that changed the conversation forever. There were unmistakable Norse-style turf buildings. There were artifacts. There was evidence of ironworking, something especially important because it pointed to a functioning Norse presence rather than a random drift voyage. Today, Ramskou Meadows stands as the clearest archaeological proof that Norse people reached North America around the turn of the 11th century. Not in legend alone, not in romantic speculation, in a real place with real structures on the far western side of the Atlantic, centuries before Columbus. This is why the phrase proves they reached America can be misleading when attached to the sunstone. They do not need a crystal to prove landfall. Ramskou Meadows already does that. What remains uncertain is how they navigated so effectively in difficult northern conditions. The archaeology confirms the destination. It does not fully reveal the method, and that is where the navigation stone returns, not as the star witness, but as a possible missing detail in a voyage already known to have happened. To understand why a sunstone seems plausible, we need to picture the North Atlantic itself. This was not a warm blue highway. It was a place of glare, haze, sudden weather, sea spray, and cloud layers that could erase the sun while still leaving enough light to travel by. At high northern latitudes, daylight behaves differently from what many sailors farther south would expect. Twilight can stretch. The sky can remain bright, but directionally confusing. Traditional navigation did not depend on one trick. Sailors could use winds, swell direction, bird movements, whale routes, sea color, ice, and coastal memory. But sunlight still mattered for orientation. If a navigator could estimate where the sun was hidden behind cloud, that could help preserve a general course over long distances. This is the heart of the theory. Not that Vikings possessed some impossible technology, but that they may have exploited a natural property of light. Sunlight scattered through the atmosphere creates polarization patterns across the sky. Humans usually do not notice them directly. Certain crystals can interact with them in ways that reveal directional information. If Norse sailors discovered and used such a method, it would have been elegant. Simple materials, sharp eyes, repeated practice. But plausible is not the same as proven. In 1967, Danish archaeologist Thorkild Ramskou gave the old sunstone idea a modern scientific frame. He suggested that the medieval sunstone might have been a polarizing crystal, especially Iceland spar, a clear variety of calcite found in the North Atlantic world. Such a crystal can split light and, under the right conditions, help a user infer the sun's position from polarization patterns in the sky. It was a striking proposal because it connected Saga language, a seafaring need, and optical physics. Iceland spar was a real material. The navigational challenge was real, and the Sagas did preserve a term that seemed to fit. For many people, the pieces clicked into place almost too neatly. But Ramskou's theory was still a theory. It did not show that Viking crews actually carried these stones at sea. It did not prove how often they were used, whether only specialists understood them, or whether the saga references meant exactly what modern readers hoped they meant. It simply opened a serious possibility. That possibility has endured because it sits in a rare middle ground. It is not pure fantasy, but it is not secure fact either. It is a bridge between textual hints and physical science, waiting for stronger historical footing. In 2011, researchers reported a calcite crystal from the wreck of an Elizabethan ship near Alderney. The find was much later than the Viking Age, but it renewed interest in the idea that such crystals could serve as navigational aids. If mariners in another era carried a calcite crystal aboard ship, Perhaps the concept had practical value after all. Still, this is where careful history matters. A 16th century shipwreck does not prove a Viking practice from 5 centuries earlier. It shows possibility, not continuity. Objects can be repurposed, techniques can emerge, disappear, or be reinvented. The Alderney crystal is intriguing because it demonstrates that the navigation stone idea is not absurd. It does not create a direct chain of evidence back to Leif Erikson. Experimental studies published in the early 2010s pushed the discussion further. Under controlled conditions, trained users could estimate the sun's position with polarizing crystals, even in cloudy weather or twilight. These experiments suggest the method can work physically. That is important. But again, a successful modern experiment is not a medieval instruction manual. So the case grows stronger in one sense and stays unresolved in another. Science shows how a sunstone might work. History still struggles to show who used it, when, and how routinely. One claim in this story is more secure than it first appears. The Norse voyages west were not guided by surviving medieval European world maps in any meaningful sense. Their landfalls in North America came before later cartographic traditions of the western North Atlantic were established in Europe. In simple terms, they got there before mapmakers could show others how. That does not mean they sailed blindly. Oral mapping can be powerful, so can route knowledge passed from crew to crew. A coastline remembered in sequence, a sailing direction tied to season, a pattern of islands and currents, a known departure point, a count of days at sea. For experienced mariners, these could function as a kind of living chart. This may be the most important perspective of all. We often assume that exploration follows formal maps. In the Viking Age, the sequence was often reversed. Sailors created the knowledge first. Written geography came later. A sunstone, if used, would have fit that world perfectly. It would not replace seamanship. It would support seamanship in a culture already capable of crossing enormous distances with remarkable precision. The Forgotten Stone, then, is not really about proving America. It is about understanding how much practical intelligence existed before parchment maps caught up with experience. Another mystery shadows the voyage. If the Norse reached North America so early, why did they not remain there in lasting numbers? Lens aux Meadows appears to have been a short-lived base, not the beginning of a new Iceland. The reasons are still debated, but several possibilities make sense together. Distance was one problem. Any Western outpost depended on fragile lines back to Greenland and Iceland. Supply, communication, and reinforcement were difficult. The Norse world in Greenland was never very large to begin with. It may simply have lacked the population and surplus needed to sustain a far colony. Relations with indigenous peoples may also have shaped the outcome. Saga traditions describe encounters, sometimes tense or violent. These accounts are late and imperfect, but they hint that settlement was not taking place in an empty landscape. Environmental limits mattered too. A place useful for timber gathering or exploration might not have seemed ideal for permanent occupation under Norse conditions. So even if a sunstone helped navigators reach Vinland, it could not solve every problem that came after arrival. Finding a coast and holding a colony are different achievements. The first was briefly accomplished. The second was not. So where does that leave the famous navigation stone? In the most careful reading, it proves less than popular headlines suggest, and more than complete skeptics sometimes allow. It does not prove that Vikings reached America. Archaeology has already done that. It does not prove that every westward voyage depended on a crystal. The evidence is too thin for that. But the sunstone remains a serious possibility because it answers a real navigational problem with a physically credible method. and because medieval texts preserve at least a suggestive memory of such an object. That combination is why the idea refuses to disappear. Perhaps the better conclusion is this: the Vikings did not need miraculous technology. They needed skill, endurance, and a sophisticated understanding of the sea. A crystal may have been one small part of that knowledge, or it may be a misunderstood echo from literature, later interpreted through modern science. For now, both options remain open. What is beyond dispute is the larger achievement. Around the year 1000, Norse sailors crossed from Greenland to North America before any familiar European map could guide them there. Whether aided by a sunstone or not, they reached a continent that later history would pretend was still unknown.